everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. We're really excited to see a room full of people that are interested in this topic because we are very interested in it. So we are going to give this talk called Cracking the NIH Code, How to Land an Early Career Development Award. My name is Kelli O'Laughlin. This is Stephanie Carreiro and David Jang, DJ. And we are going to get started. So first we want to acknowledge our funders, National Institute of Mental Health, Harvard University for AIDS Research, the National Institute of Heart, Lung, and Blood, and the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And we have no disclosures. We are going to first introduce ourselves, then tell you why you might consider going the NIH-K pathway, talk about who in EM is doing this, and then we're going to dive in a little bit and share with you components of the K grant and our own stories of failures and successes. So to lead us off with the introductions, David Jang.
Hi, I'm DJ at University of Pennsylvania. I'm a medical toxicologist as well as an emergency medicine physician. So my area of interest actually is a little bit more lab-based. So my focus is really looking at mitochondrial dysfunction in various cell models and animal models of poisoning and looking at therapy. Pretty much it.
Thanks. Perfect. Okay. So I'm Stephanie Carreiro. I'm also a toxicologist like DJ. Go Tox. Sorry. So my research actually, when I was in residency, started out similar to DJ, basic science models and animal models of toxicity, and then during Tox Fellowship, I really transitioned over to clinical and translational models, mostly because of what my mentor is doing. And so where I've ended up is actually looking at M-health applications and wearable applications in substance use disorders. And my K23 is through NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, and specifically my K is looking at how we use wearables to monitor patients who are newly started on opioids and identify period transitions to opioid tolerance and potentially risk for opioid use disorder.
My name's Kelli, as I said, and my funding with my K is through the National Institute of Mental Health. And my health research is global, and the way that I tell the story is I basically study people and why their health behaviors and why they choose to utilize the services that they do or don't, the barriers to care, and then I design and implement health interventions and study how that works. And I do this in refugee populations, in humanitarian settings. So my current research is in Uganda, in southwestern Uganda, in Nachavali Refugee Settlement, and I have done a deep dive on access to HIV testing, linkage to HIV care and engagement in care. But really, my goal is to work in this population and to improve health in this population. And HIV has been where I've started. Actually, yeah.
So I'll just do the intro part. My voice is pretty loud, but I'll just do sort of the intro part just to sort of orientate you in terms of what a K award is, and we'll sort of like do the deep dive into sort of the specifics for this. How many people here are like resident fellow level versus like young faculty? So mostly like sort of, which is great. So I kind of wanted to throw this out here just to sort of give you an idea in terms of like if you guys are looking for faculty positions or kind of new to this, in terms of kind of aligning what your sort of career goals are, particularly if it's research, kind of what we're talking about today. You know, I think I'll start with like sort of the dabbler. These are mostly sort of full-time clinicians who occasionally do some case reports and things like that. Obviously, most of you guys are more interested in research, so this probably won't be applicable to you. Sort of the next sort of like track or flavor is sort of what you know people are often referred to as collaborator. I think at most academic institutions, they often referred to as sort of clinical educator track or some sort of equivalent. Really sort of their role is, you know, research is a lot of times their big focus or educational stuff. In many cases, they're often not the PI, but often a co-investigator, often getting salary support on someone else's grant like 10 to 30%. But they do still do a fair amount of research as part of their sort of the academic portfolio. But really the focus today obviously is sort of you guys are more interested in is really sort of becoming like a full-time sort of physician scientist or kind of principal investigator. This is often sort of the tenure track or research track at sort of many academic institutions. And really sort of like the punchline is you really have to support most of your salary anywhere between 75 to 85% pretty much through grants. So there is obviously some challenges associated with that. But you know, there's a lot of perks that we'll sort of talk about today. A lot of it being sort of like, you know, you bring sort of like indirects to the university as well as the department. Obviously, there's a little bit of prestige associated with that. And, most importantly, I think it's just really awesome, kind of like the careers that we do that we'll sort of get into. So what is a K-Series grant? It's sort of like the general concept is it's really 3 to 5 years of protected time, right? It's really a time to sort of focus on you as an investigator, sort of develop yourself to become an independent investigator. So the whole idea behind this is that you have this protected time from sort of your academic administrative responsibilities to pursue this, essentially what people often will say is 75% protected time. And the big component of this that you'll see sort of later on is that it's really close mentorship. Many times it's sort of people outside your department, but it's really someone who sort of know the ropes, have their own funding to sort of teach you something to become your own independent investigator. It's really that time. I think in sort of academia, as you guys are probably aware of, it's all about time, and I think it really gives you that time to sort of develop this kind of career development. And really the other purpose of the K Award is really to sort of bridge yourself to independency, which is often the R01 that we sort of talk about as being the gold standard. It comes in many different flavors. If you look through like NIH and some of the resources they'll give later, there's like a bunch of different number serials. It's actually kind of confusing, but really I think the really 3 to focus on are the one I have here on the slide. The K08, K23, essentially the same thing. It's sort of very equivalent in terms of amount of years and things like that. There are some subtle differences. For the K08, is what I have. It's really more for research where you're not really touching patients, or if it's more lab-based. You can see here on the bottom, there's a paper I'll sort of reference that we published in the past couple months. So really only 7 across a 10-year period in emergency medicine have obtained a KOA. Far more, which is the K23. That's probably the more common flavor just because we're clinicians. And this really career development grant is if you're doing sort of career or patient-focused research, you're sort of touching patients, et cetera. You can see here there's been about 45 awarded over a 10-year period. The K99R00, or the Kangaroo Award, I'll just kind of briefly mention, I think for the most part, most of the folks in this room probably won't even go there. It's a little bit of a different beast. It's really someone who's a little bit more sort of advanced, really at the postdoctoral level, where it's like 2 years of mental support, which bridges you to like 3 years of independent funding. It's a very kind of weird hybrid, and it's its own logistical challenge. Apparently one in emergency medicine have obtained this over 10 years. I suspect it's probably just a postdoctoral fellow that probably was within the emergency medicine department, and they sort of got credit for that. This is the exciting part, and this is the part that we're all very passionate about. There's a lot of benefits. You'll see there's some challenges in pursuing a K award, but I think by and far and large, the benefits outweigh sort of the cost. First and foremost, how many people here have loans? Yeah, pretty much everyone, right? I graduated, non-disclosure, I graduated with a $250,000 debt from medical school, so obviously pursuing research was a little bit of, as my wife would say, kind of a money loss. But, one of the things out there that you may or may not be aware of is NIH really does incentivize sort of clinicians such as us to kind of pursue research. One of the things they do, the mechanism is the loan repayment program. Essentially, it's a 2-year contract that pays $75,000 across a 2-year period where they actually pay a lot of the taxes on that. That goes directly towards your loan. So, for example, I'm on year 3 of the loan repayment, so you can keep renewing essentially until you pay down your loans, as long as you're kind of doing at least 40 or 50% research per their definition. Number 2, I think, is something that we're all very passionate about. As you can see, sort of the diversity. It's really taking what we train for clinically and applying that in sort of a very sort of structured manner to essentially affect patient care later in the future. And I think that's super exciting, a lot of the stuff that we do. Part 3 is, being an SAEM, I think, as you can probably tell, we're very passionate about mentorship. And it affords you sort of the opportunity to mentor sort of younger kind of investigators who are very interested in it. It is a very sort of torturous path. So having someone who's sort of looking out for you, giving you opportunities and things like that, it's both very exciting from kind of on both levels. And number 4, personally for me, and as you'll probably see for both Kelly and Steph, it's a lot of career satisfaction. I do think as emergency medicine physicians, it's tough to work clinically, 90, 100% of the time. I think this is sort of like a nice kind of emergency medicine. We like to kind of do different things. So I think it sort of like speaks to that. I'll sort of will end my part with, how are we doing as specialty in research, right? You can see here, this is actually one of our former residents, now faculty, who did this on Glimmer blog, talking about SOCs and how they correlate with specialties. But, if you had to guess which specialty is probably doing awesome in terms of research funding, which SOC or specialty would you pick? There's actually 3 that are doing really awesome. Yeah, pretty much all of them but emergency medicine, right? And so yeah, exactly. And so that's what we did. So in this 10-year kind of paper, we looked at QBR data, which is essentially both unfunded and funded grants by NIH in terms of specialty. You can see here on the top 3 lines, it's pretty much dominated by, internal medicine and neurology, pediatrics. Not surprising, right? They've been around longer and things like that. you can see here in the dotted blue line, emergency medicine is low, but it's sort of making its upswing up. And, kind of what we'll talk about is I think, in terms of NIH and our own society, SAEM and things like that, I think there's a lot of room for growth and they recognize that. So I think it's a great time to sort of get your hands or feet sort of stuck into this. And you can see that's just another way of looking at it on the graph on the right. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I think, Kelly? Yes, Steph. Perfect.
So we're playing musical mics a little bit, but I think it's good to change it up and keep everyone awake, hopefully. So I'm going to talk a little more in depth about the components of the K Award. So Kelly and I are both going to dive into that a little bit. And first we wanted to just kind of give you an overall sense of how the applications are scored or evaluated. And so if you've ever submitted an NIH grant, you know that you put an incredible amount of time and energy into it. You hit submit, you relax a little bit, and then you wait something like 6 or 8 months and don't hear anything but crickets for a while. And so there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and that's kind of how you get to your score. And so basically your grants are evaluated by a panel of experts, so senior level investigators and a study section. So a study section is somewhere between 15 or 20 senior folks, but there are going to be 3 that have actually read your proposal, hopefully in depth. So those are your 3 reviewers, reviewer 1, 2, and 3. Reviewer 3 is notoriously the awful person who tells you you're horrible, and reviewer 1 and 2 are usually more favorable, as the jokes go. But basically, the 3 reviewers are going to break down your application and score it on 5 criteria that are listed here, and they're going to give you a score on each criteria between 1 and 9. And so 1 is a perfect score, 9 is absolutely the worst that you can get. Okay? And the way they tend to sort of break it down is they'll say a 1 to 3 is a strong application with only minor weaknesses. Somewhere between a 4 to a 6 is a moderate application with some significant weaknesses, and a 7 to 9 is a poor application with significant weaknesses that maybe outweigh the strengths. And that's kind of the rough way that they're supposed to look at them. And so you're going to get a score for the candidate, for your career development plan, for your research plan, your mentors, and your environment. And that's how the 3 reviewers are going to score you. They'll then go to present your case to the entire study section. They'll explain why they picked the scores for each. And then all the other members of the study section who may or may not have even read your grant or just looked at your specific aims page are going to give you a single score based on what they heard. So that's kind of how the voodoo works, right? Grant goes in, score comes out. It's kind of how it works. And so we wanted to break down each of the components individually so you can understand when you're writing what people are actually looking for. And so the first criteria is actually the candidate, and this is where K awards are a little bit or quite unique from other more typical research award like an R1, because the center of the K award is you. So the investment is in the investigator. Okay, it's not so much in the science. You got to have a good project because you really want to prove that you're doing good research that matters. But what they really want to do is develop you to that independent investigator role. And so you are really going to be woven through the entire story, your story, and how this is going to affect your impact. And so what you want to do is show your accomplishments and then how they relate to your project. Obviously, you want to prove you have a track record of publications and being successful. And they're also going to look at how your letters of support reflect on you, so how other people think of you and perceive you in terms of your potential. So you really want to prove you're awesome, but not too awesome. And so I actually view this as the opposite of admitting someone in medicine. So when I try to admit someone to medicine at my hospital, if anyone else has experience, you can sympathize. I have to prove to the hospitals that the person is sick enough to come in the hospital, but God forbid I overshoot and say that, give them any indication that they wanted them to go to the ICU, right? So the K award is going to be the exact opposite of that. You're really looking to hit that sweet spot to prove, I'm great, you want to invest in me. But if you're too great, well, why do we need to invest in you, and what do you need training for, essentially? So you want to kind of hit that sweet spot and prove that there's a very fillable gap and that you're worthy of that investment. And that's key, and it's not an easy thing to do. And how you're going to do that is you're going to kind of weave your story through the entire application, and talk about your background and your goals for your entire career. So you want to explain how your research today, even if your research is not on the topic, you can really explain how it's either got you excited about, kind of generating new hypotheses and making changes, or how it made you decide you love basic science or you didn't, and you want to do clinical research. So it doesn't have to be necessarily on that topic to be important to your background, okay? The other point I think that sometimes people don't take advantage of enough is explaining how your clinical work really impacts you. And so what I've learned over the years is that at the NIH and a lot of these research fields, being a clinician is an incredible asset because there are so many PhD researchers who are brilliant and have a lot of work behind them but have never seen a patient or don't get to have those really rich experiences that we have. And so I try to use my experience as an emergency physician and toxicologist to explain what I'm seeing on the ground with these people and how I want my research to really translate into that population. And so everything is sort of like another piece in the puzzle, and the ideal K application is going to make those all fit together perfectly. You're also going to explain your career goals. And so your short-term goals are, of course, going to be to get the K. That's why I'm writing, right? To complete the K in that 3 to 5 years, and then to become the expert in X with a very particular skill set. So, for example, my K is written so that, the time I complete the K, I want to be, an expert in applying mobile technologies to substance abusing patients and translating big data sets in a meaningful way from health devices into clinical practice. And so all of my goals are kind of arranged around that particular goal. And you want it to develop your niche, obviously, so you can go on and be the expert and get your R1. And the long-term goal on all of these is for you to be a federally funded independent investigator. So don't write anywhere in your K that you're not sure that that's what you want to do for the rest of your life, because that's really who they want to invest in, right? And so the second scorable criteria, which is going to be another piece of your application and really ties well into part one, is going to be your career development plan. Okay, so this is where you're going to list how you're going to fill that gap, okay? And you're going to do that by, one, on the very high level, very specific training goals, and then two, on the more granular level, very specific courses, meetings, et cetera, to fill those goals. And so it doesn't have to be a degree, although a lot of people do use a degree program as the backbone of this, just because it provides a lot of structure. Some people will get a master's, some people will get a PhD, but you don't have to. That's not necessary, okay? All you need is a complement of educational opportunities that are going to help you fill that gap that you outlined in the first part. So it can be formal classwork, either in person or online. It can be seminars. It can be practical experiences. It can also be meetings you attend. So again, kind of going back to my example, I've written into my K going annually to 2 different computer science and engineering conferences, which are typically not part of my normal CME, but they allow me to be exposed to just different methodologies that I wouldn't normally see, okay? And then there's also a role for independent study. And so we'll talk a little later, I think part 4, about your mentorship team. And so each of your mentors is going to bring something very special to the table in terms of their expertise. And so you actually can, and it's completely legitimate to write in, you're going to have independent study with Dr. X. We will meet twice a week, for an hour, and we'll talk about this methodology using my data as a platform, okay? All of those kind of specific courses are going to lead up to a very specific set of techniques that you're going to learn or skills. And importantly, you want to outline them with a very specific timeline. So I'm going to show this is my training goal plan. So I've been told it looks kind of scary. It's not. It's not as bad as it looks. But what I did was basically I outlined 5 goals on the left. And so these are all the things that I want to do in my K. And then in the center column are each of the courses, meetings, independent studies, et cetera, that are going to get me there. And then finally on the right, which is also really important, is I outlined a timeline. And so if you really go through this, it may not be obvious looking at the timeline, but if you really go through this, the didactic courses, those things are really focused on the first year 1 and 2 of the K. And the things that are going to make me more independent, like kind of independent study to analyze my own data, writing my R01, et cetera, are going to go in years 3 and 4. And so again, it's all kind of put together to be as logical as possible to say, these 4 years are going to get me from being the awesome investigator with a gap to the independent scientist who's ready to ready to get the R01. And so with that, I'm going to let Kelly take over, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about the actual science and the research plan.
So the 12-page grant, that's the maximum, usually is broken into about 8 pages of research. So the first 4 are what Stephanie's talked about with the candidate, who you are, and your mentorship plan. And now we're into the meat of the grant, which is part of it, which is the research. So this includes a specific aims page, a significance section, an innovation section, and an approach. And in parentheses, I show kind of the suggested page amount that they suggest, but really the rule is the whole thing is 12 pages. So the specific aims page is really important. It is the most important page of the grant. The introduction paragraph needs to really outline the significance of the problem or the gap in knowledge that you're going to address. And then you dive into your very specific focused goals called the specific aims. Usually people have 2 to 4, and there's a sweet spot between hitting that it's the right amount, but not too much, because in K it's a big deal if you say you're going to do too much because they think there's not enough time, they can't accomplish all that while they're training. You need to use strong language, meaning very specific words like I'm going to identify or define or quantify or determine, and then very narrow focused goals with concrete objectives. This page will also include how the research meets the research priorities of whatever agency you're applying to, and how the results will impact the research field and move it forward. And then usually this page also includes a bit about the candidate and mentor team and how they're well positioned to do the research and to teach the candidate whatever it is their goals were for learning. In the significance section, this should address why your work is important, what the literature shows, how what you propose will be an advancement in what the literature is showing. And important recent kind of newer criteria are to address the scientific rigor, the scientific premise, and sex as a biological variable. And so, as Stephanie was saying, the reviewers have such a short amount of time to review the grant. So in the grant, you'll actually have these as headers, or you'll just you want to make it pop off the page that you checked all these boxes. The innovation section is an opportunity to share with your reviewer how what your research is going to change science or medicine and how it is novel. This might be a new intervention, or might be the way that you're doing it or where you're doing it. And you can also insert here how it is potentially scalable or how it's going to have a big impact. And finally, the meat of the research section is really the approach. In this, you first introduce the preliminary work that you have done, and this usually includes the work that your mentor has done, depending on how closely your research relates to your mentor's research, if you're in their lab or not. A little different for me in global health, because my mentors are experts in global health but had never been to the refugee settlement where I do my work, so it kind of depends on what your field is. You need to describe your study in detail in this section. You can reflect and expand on specific aims. You insert the statistical analysis. You really specify very specific methods on how you're going to carry out the research. And then you also insert barriers, how you can overcome them, and show that you're anticipating things that you might be up against, but that you have a plan that it will work, and you will work around it. And then you also want to insert very detailed deliverables. For instance, like throughout my grant, I have, on this month, I will submit this abstract to this conference. It probably will be titled this, and then 2 months later, I'm going to submit this manuscript to this journal about. So it's that level of detail. One of my mentors always says, a grant is a fairy tale, and you need to sell the fairy tale, like tell the story. You don't actually have to do that in that exact month or that journal or that conference. You don't even have to take the course you said you were going to take, but you have to have a really convincing fairy tale, basically. So this is an example from my K of my timeline, and I tried to integrate, and this is also I want to say, basically you need to integrate your training with your research. And so I tried to do that here, and for me, my training domains then are up in the top part. They were, and then the bottom part was the aims that I had for my research, and I tried to show when each of those were going to occur. The M designates manuscripts, and then showing some conferences. So these are all slides also that are online through SAEM, so feel free to grab them, but we'll also give you our emails, and we're, I'm sure, happy to share more details. Stephanie.
I'd like to talk a little bit about mentors, but just reflecting on what Kelly just mentioned, I think that one of the things that I guess I didn't know starting out that I've come to realize more is that people who have been through this are more than happy to share, and there really is no need to reinvent the wheel. So one of the most important things for you to do before you start writing these is find a couple of people who are willing to share their Ks with you, and find different types of Ks, and then just read them through. You know, I would look at successful ones and maybe not successful ones, and see if you can find some of the summary statements and comments too. But then again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use the types of tables that Kelly used, or I used, or other people used to structure your, you don't want to plagiarize them, but to structure what you're doing, and that will save you a lot of time in the end. And so the fourth important component, which is also scoreable, is your mentorship team, including your consultants and collaborators. And so initially when I'm number one, I said the candidate is the most important. I would probably argue that the mentorship team maybe is the second most important part, because you're going to prove that you're awesome and that you should be invested in because you're great, and you have this gap and you want to fill it with all these training things, and they're going to say, great, who is going to train you? Because this is a mentored career development award. So who are those people who are going to take you to kind of greatness as you describe in this grant? And it's your mentorship team, so they have to be really, really carefully selected. And so generally speaking, this is going to be, you usually have one or some, rarely I've seen two, but usually one primary mentor, and then you have a few additional secondary mentors, and teams are usually somewhere between 3 to 5 people, maybe 6 people total. And each mentor on your team should have a very specific role that and they should complement one another. And so there shouldn't be any real duplication on the team. You want to consider, obviously, emergency physicians, maybe, may or may not, your primary mentor may or may not be an emergency physician. Emergency physicians, other specialists, so cardiologists, infectious disease, other clinicians. You want to consider biostatisticians, in some cases, engineers or computer science folks like myself. I have those on my team. Psychiatrists, psychologists, that sort of thing. Some people will have qualitative experts and things like that. So your team is really going to be, each person is going to have a unique skill set that they bring to your team and they bring to you. And so they really shouldn't be just people you like hanging out with. We make a joke about this, but it's true, right? So there's a difference between people you enjoy being with personally and people who are going to be great mentors. Because the people who are going to be great mentors are going to understand the commitment, what they're signing up for, and they're going to agree to commit both their effort and their time to you, because it's a huge investment on both ends, okay? And you also have to be good at working together from the academic standpoint. And so I would just kind of consider that up front. They probably should be NIH funded, especially your primary mentor. It's great if everybody on your team is NIH funded, but certainly your primary mentor and then the majority of your team should be. Because again, you're going to prove to the NIH that they know what they're doing, they're going to get you through. On the same thread, they really should have a track record of mentoring junior investigators to independence, particularly if they have an experience with the K mechanism. That's most important. So again, primary mentor is super important that they've successfully mentored another K awardee, but the remainder of your secondary mentors probably, it'd be great if they do as well. And again, they really need to be willing to commit to you for that time period. So after your mentorship team is settled, you can actually supplement with either advisors or collaborators. And there's not really good, and potentially consultants, although not so many consultants on Ks. You usually don't see many consultants on Ks because you don't have any money to pay them. And so consultants are really paid usually for a specific piece of advice or expertise, whereas in the K, you're not paying anyone. They're all doing this for free for you. And so once you kind of assemble your team, you're going to put together a section in your grant that's going to describe them. And again, you're going to describe all those things, all the reasons you picked them. You're going to create, chapter 5 of your fairy tale, as Kelly mentioned, describe why they're excellent at that role, why you guys work together really well, and why they're going to get you to where you need to go. And so you're going to describe their qualifications. So Dr. X is an expert in this analytic technique that I need to learn, or Dr. Y is an expert in this clinical field, and they're going to help me. For example, so I'm a toxicologist, right? And so I see, from the emergency perspective, a lot of overdoses and substance use disorder, but I'm not an addiction psychiatrist, right? And so I was never trained in that realm. And so as that's an important piece of my grant, I have an addiction psychiatrist on my team, right? So you want to describe their qualifications and then describe their history of funding. So Dr. X has been continuously NIH funded for the last 10 years through NIDA. It helps if it doesn't have to be your institute, but it helps. And all of their related grants you can list or complementary to my project. And then finally, you want to explicitly explain the commitment they're making to you and what they're going to teach you. And so in my letters from mentors that you actually end up writing for your mentor and they sign it, or they make it better and sign it. But you're going to write, so I'm going to meet with Dr. X bi-weekly for 1 to 2 hours per week. We are going to review, X analytic method, and we're going to use my data from AIM 1B to do that. So so it has to be, again, that granular. And again, you don't want to say, they're going to spend 20 hours a week. That's not reasonable. So you want to balance it out and make sure it's reasonable, but very concrete. And then finally, you're going to want to kind of establish that you have a relationship previously with that mentor and that you work well together. So you want to talk about how many publications or projects you've worked on together. And again, this is great if you've had multiple publications with your mentorship team. But in the brainstorming phase of the K, if you haven't published with everyone on your mentor team, you want to figure out how you can publish quickly. And the way that usually works is one of a couple of ways. So usually your mentor is working on something, and then they can kind of rope you into the writing so that you can get something out, or vice versa. You have something that's kind of ready to go, and you can involve your mentor in a way that's meaningful enough to include them on your publication. Or you can write a review article, and those can be somewhat time-consuming, but that's also a great way. And so if anyone's in toxicology, a plug for DJ's section in Journal Medical Toxicology, they actually have a specific mechanism to submit for this very purpose. And so it's
Research concepts.
Research concepts, yes. So I apologize. So there's a section in JMT called Research Concepts, and it's supposed to be fast-track expedited publications, and the idea is to just kind of do a review on a particular concept. So the one I did was kind of innovations in technology and toxicology research, and I got my whole mentorship team on it, and within 4 months we had another publication together. So those opportunities can be really powerful. But again, those kind of publications are going to prove that you guys work well together. And the last piece, Kelly's going to talk a little about the environment. Yeah.
Okay, so this is number 5 because it's the 5th scoring criteria. So, and this, the 5th criteria is the environment and the institutional commitment to the candidate. An important thing for this, as Stephanie has said before, don't reinvent the wheel. A lot of these documents exist at your institution or with your mentors, and you are going to get them and tweak them for your grant. But it's important to have so you get 1 page to describe where you work and how the space or the lab or whatever it is that you need is there and is a resource that you're going to be able to tap into. Then you get 1 page where you have to outline how your institution has a responsible conduct of research program, and you're going to attend all of these courses. Most institutions we work at have this, and so you're basically just learning what is it and where do I go and what classes am I signing up for. 1 page institutional commitment to the candidate's research career development is actually a letter, and again, this is something that you should grab from examples from other people at your institution. And then you get 6 pages of letters of support, and this will look different depending on what your research is and where it is. For instance, for me, some of it is letters of support from the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees in Uganda saying, we know she's here, she's going to do the research. From the Ministry of Health in Uganda saying, yeah, we're on board, this sounds good. So basically you're convincing your committee also that you've done the legwork, people know who you are, and you have access to what you need to do. DJ, you were going to add something?
I just wanted to add a couple of things just because if you guys are thinking about KO8 or something that's a little bit more basic science or lab based, there are some particular nuances with this particular section that's super important that I sort of got nailed on in terms of my first initial review. So the description of the institute environment, so if you're doing lab-based stuff, they're essentially going to want to know what your lab space is, and they actually want to know what your square footage is, and obviously no one at this stage expects you to have your own lab. So if you're within someone's lab, which is going to be the more common thing, you just sort of have to spell out sort of the lab space per square footage, the access to equipment, and things like that. The other thing too that's sort of relevant more towards the KOA, which actually one of the reviewers actually directly said, in the chair letter, which essentially is going to be the institutional commitment, they're going to have to specify what your clinical obligations are. So they will literally have to say, well, this person is X shifts per whatever. One of the sort of the things that is a death blow, and I've seen this in sort of other K applications, when essentially the chair letter says, well, if the person gets a K, his hours will go down. It's sort of like this sort of like kind of like if they get the K sort of thing. So it clearly doesn't show commitment, and that's definitely something that they look out for specifically. And the other thing that, again, is maybe not relevant to the K23, but definitely more for the KOA if you do lab-based stuff, particularly within NHLBI, is that they want to know if you have a startup. I think that's a little bit of a tougher sell if you guys are younger faculty being recruited to like a different institution. Some people do get like recruitment packages, so that's like kind of like a PhD kind of thing. So that's sort of what they expected. They actually literally said, well, this guy what's his startup? How much money is he getting? Like they want to know how much you're getting. So if you are thinking of going that route, that's a discussion you need to have with your prospective employer or whatever institution as you're sort of like, looking for jobs and stuff like that.
So I would just add one thing. So one of the kind of specific pieces of language that I got from my mentor, and he was like, this needs to be in the chair letter, is that we are committed to Dr. Carreiro's success in this project. We will provide any supplemental resources, because the K is it's a relatively small grant. So most of the money goes to your salary support, but it's only like $50,000 a year for research. And if you look at R01s, you're talking about multi-million-dollar projects. So there's like, you're essentially getting pennies to do big work. And so they know that money's got to come from other places and resources. So your chair has to specifically say, above and beyond this K, we'll provide whatever, you need for success. And that, I think, goes a long way.
So the K does come with a lot of administrative documents, and it's important to have a heads up about that. I'd say it takes about 4 months of dedicated time to get the K ready. Is a good ballpark figure. That's assuming you're working a full clinical load, like 11. Would you say 4 months? 6 months would be ideal, but so in this, some of these we've covered, but I just want to go through. So you're going to submit something about the responsible conduct of research. You're going to have a human subject section that kind of looks like an IRB protocol. You're going to go through a facilities and resources section where you present what's at your facility. And in that section, you can also, these are opportunities to infuse whatever it is you wanted to that you didn't have room to say in your grant in terms of what research you're going to do or your candidate development. You can kind of insert things in there too. There's going to be a very specific budget, a budget justification, another opportunity to infuse like something else about your mentor or some, other things like that. Project summary, abstract, public health significance. These are little blurbs that will be available online for all to read. So these are important parts. And then your NIH Biosketch, which is kind of taking your CV and putting it in NIH language. And that takes its own little chunk of time. And a cover letter, which doesn't take that long. You also get, in addition, so you have 3 outside peers who have to kind of vouch for who you are, your personality, and they can be, they submit letters basically directly to the NIH on your behalf. So for me, I was tapping attendings from my residency that I didn't work, so it doesn't have to be someone working with you on your research at that time. There is a letter of support from your department chair, letters of support from your mentor, and from the collaborators. Those bottom ones go into the 6-page limit. This takes a bit of time, and as Stephanie had said before, you actually write all of them. It's really painful. You write them yourself. And so it's better to have time to do them because you need to separate them out by like a day or 2, or you choose the same adjectives to describe how wonderful you are. So it's of course, the person who is signing it will edit it or revise it or whatever, but sometimes not so much. So that can be a little bit time consuming. So it's a bit of a process. While I said it takes 4 to 6 months to actually get the grant ready, I'd say when I decided, okay, I'm committed, this is my pathway, it took 2 or 3 years until I was ready, because then I had to be like, well, what is my niche, and who are my mentors, and what resources do I have? And I know I like global health and I like refugees, but how am I going to dive into that? And it takes a while to get to that point where you have preliminary data, and that takes a little bit of funding to get preliminary data. Get a couple of publications, get publications with your mentors. And so the process, while the grant can take 4 to 6 months, once you've decided, I'm doing it, like it is, sure, I'm going to have to roll up my sleeves and address the fact that there's going to be some setbacks and some successes along the way. It does take a couple of years, and that's okay. Like, I always am amazed, like when you finish residency, you think you've arrived, right? You're there. But actually, as a junior faculty, I'm 12 years out of residency, but I think I still sometimes feel junior, and the first 5 to 7 years out of residency, you're definitely still learning and investing in yourself and trying to attend courses or seminars so that you can get better, trying to find mentors that you can learn from. So, and that will continue. So it's okay, wherever you are in that process. And one of the things in global health, it's tricky because there isn't really a defined path. I think if you choose toxicology, sometimes it's a little bit more defined, and there's a lot of toxicology researchers, so the fellowships kind of set you up for research. If you have something that's a little bit less traditional, sometimes that pathway takes longer just because it isn't so obvious. So part of getting ready is making sure your department's committed, your mentoring team's in place, and you're ready to go. We wanted to share with you guys this Nih Reporter Site, and there's a link in a couple slides forward. If you haven't been here before, this is the perfect place to start. It's open, it's online. You just put an Nih Reporter into Google, and it will bring you into this search engine. You can search your institution to see who's there doing what that's funded by Nih. You can search specific people and read about their projects and think like, how many aims did they have? How specific were their aims? You can put in a topic that you're interested in and say like, are other people in you can also put specialty. And one other thing that I keep thinking of, you do have to find NIH-funded mentors. They don't have to be emergency medicine. So hopefully in the future we will all be emergency medicine, and we won't even help it, because there will be so many NIH-funded emergency medicine people that will just be right in front of each other. But right now that's not so much the case. But we all work at institutions where there are amazing people that can be on our mentorship team that also aren't emergency medicine. So we wanted to end on our own failures and successes, just to kind of open it up, and then after that we'll have a little bit of time for questions. I've shared with you some of mine, but I would just say one of my hardest things was just getting started, because I was global health. I did my master's in public health. I really liked research, but I would say it was 5 years until I met the right person, and it was a little bit accidental that I was just looking for a mentor in general in academics. And she said, I will be your mentor, but I do NIH. She's an infectious disease doctor. I do NIH research. So if I'm going to mentor you, this is what your career is going to look like, and this is the pathway. This is what you're signing up for. So I would say it took me a while to get started because of that non-traditional pathway. Do you guys want to jump in with some of yours and then?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest pitfalls that I experienced and just had to kind of learn the hard way was the concept that communicating with your program officer at the NIH is key, and it really can make a huge difference in where your application goes. And so the process feels very impersonal, right? You submit this giant 150-page thing to someone, and 8 months back, you get this really, kind of weird score and things like that. But there are people on the other end. So you get assigned a program officer as soon as your application goes in, and you can even contact program officers before you submit an application and talk with them. And they're really nice people. Like you can get on the phone with them, or like if you're in the area, you can meet in person. I've been down there a couple times to meet, and they want you to succeed, because when they get assigned, a grant goes into their portfolio, and so there are some metrics I think that they get graded on based on how successful their portfolios are, and so they really want to help you get there. They also can be your advocate, and so your program officer is actually can sometimes be at the study section listening in. They can't comment, but they can listen to what the reviewers have to say, and they also can be at council when the actual funding decisions get made, and so they're not allowed to tell you, oh, someone said you're awful, but they're allowed to say they really, this seemed like this came up a lot, they really didn't like that, or whatever the case may be, so they can give you some supplemental information. So when I first, I submitted my first K application, it was a little bit different. So I had an internal K, a KL2, which is the same as a K12, which is kind of the K from your institution. So I was on that for 3 years, and I just transitioned off that to a K23. And I had submitted my K23, and I got a good score that was slightly above the pay line. And then so I just kind of sat there and waited to see what happened for like a year, and nothing happened. And then so I resubmitted again. And I actually got the same score the second time, but it ended up getting funded. But what I didn't do the first time is I didn't call the PO right after the score came in. I didn't immediately respond to all the reviewers' critiques. So they're going to send you, when they send you the summary statement, they send you scores, but they also have a lot of written critique, what they said the strengths and weaknesses are. And what you're technically supposed to do is take all those and you write up a response to each one of them. I will change this, or this is incorrect because why. And then when you submit you resubmit your grant, you're going to change your grant and include that. But in the meantime, you can take that rebuttal or the responses, send it to the PO and say, hey, here's my responses to what they said. Can we have a discussion? And it's pretty powerful, because then the PO, when they go to council or when they're talking about your application, otherwise they can say, yeah, I know the score was a couple points above where we want, but the reviewers were wrong. The reviewers misunderstood the technique or whatever the case may be. So they can really advocate for you. So in my case, I think it was a little unfortunate. I do that the first time, but it all worked out okay. And so these are the kind of things you don't know until someone tells you. It's okay to call them and have a conversation with them. So I would be kind of active with them and engage with them through the whole process.
Great. You sort of echo what Kelly said. I mean, everyone obviously has their own trials. I mean, for me, I had to resubmit, including resubmissions, 4 times. And, a lot of it involving, I actually had 2 mentors leave kind of halfway as I was resubmitting, like a bad date, and my wife's like, what's wrong with you? And so eventually it worked out. But, I do think the challenges are, particularly with like sort of lab-based stuff, I mean, they're right. I mean, I think most of the mentors that you're going to seek for your K are probably going to be outside your specialty, which is totally cool, and I think it's actually encouraged sort of for this sort of team science approach. So for me, in particular, there's really no lab-based emergency medicine position for the most part, right? So I kind of went outside that. And I think it has its own challenges, right? It's sort of like, lab sort of stuff is its own world, its own culture, and things like that. So that was sort of part of the challenge. But I think as clinicians, one of the things that we sort of bring in, I think they can sort of speak to the same, is that, we sort of have direct contact with a wide range of disease processes. And I think that was sort of one of my strengths is in terms of doing lab-based stuff. We have access to patients, blood samples, yada, yada, yada. And then you can sort of take sort of lab-based stuff that you're learning, like for me, example, mitochondrial dysfunction, and sort of apply that at the bedside and then look at therapy and things like that. So I think they're totally right. I think sort of like part of it is finding the right mentor in lab space is kind of like finding the right mate, right? You want to find someone you're compatible with, not someone who's too hands-on, but not someone who's too hands-off. And a lot of times with these, at least for me, for the PI, they're often very busy. So I mostly work through like postdocs and technicians in terms of learning the basic techniques. So I don't know, it's probably analogous in terms of like specific sort of population-based techniques and things like that. So it might be sort of a similar vein too as well. Because as you guys will see, I personally, like for my first, I literally looked on the NIH Reporter through the Institute and just emailed sort of these people, and and they respond. I was like, oh, let's meet, let's have coffee, blah, blah, blah. And that's sort of how you're probably going to do the same thing too as well.
The kind of other piece I would add to, I think a pitfall that it took me a while to kind of overcome, is I think I really underestimated what being a clinician brings to the table at the NIH. I think that, so my first call for, I have the loan repayment program, just like DJ, and my first application got declined, got rejected or whatever, and my second one got funded. But I called the PO and talked to her, and she was like, you can hear, like, she's kind of rustling through my application. She goes, she's like, oh, you're just an MD. Oh, that's cute. And I was like, where else in the world but the NIH would someone say, oh, you're just an MD? But and so there's sometimes there's a feeling of bias, like, God, I'm not a PhD. I didn't do a postdoc. I didn't do all those things. However, what I notice is, like, when I've gone to discuss things, and when I've gone to these different conferences and talked to people, I mean, you just have such a powerful kind of voice when you're like, I see these patients every day. This is not going to work. So, like, kind of one, I think, great example is everybody wants to make a naloxone auto-injector. Like, they want something that injects naloxone with someone over. So I'm like, except no one will wear it because naloxone feels awful when you get it. And they're like, really? And so I get to explain to a bunch of really brilliant people how awful it is to get naloxone and how it would really be hard to have someone on board to, wear. And so you bring a lot to the table, and I think I underestimated that for a long time. And so just don't devalue that in your perception of where you're going, but also in your applications, kind of play that up, because it really is a strength.
And I'll just conclude in this part by saying, like DJ, I also submitted 4 times. So it's definitely once you decide you're going on the pathway, just know that you're doing it, and you will succeed, and it might take a little bit, but you will get there, and you have to figure out how to enjoy life along the way, and exercise and eat well, and still have a life, just like everything else. But it is a process and more of a long-term commitment. I just want to show you that we have this. This slide here with helpful resources. K Kiosk tells you about the different awards, the actual link to the application, and then link about the human subjects, and the NIH Reporter was up there as well.
So we just kind of wanted to conclude by basically saying that this is a path, and all of our paths have been very different. All of our paths have included kind of lots of failures along the way, but lots of successes too. But it's a worthwhile one. It's made our lives, I think, richer and our careers more fulfilling. And if you really kind of focus on what's important up front, it will really enhance your chances of success. And so kind of the big take-homes we wanted you to think about was, one, time management. This is a long process, and so kind of think about that, how that fits into your life and your career, and anticipate kind of advance what that's going to take. Two is that the mentorship is so crucial. It really is key. And there are a lot of people out there who are willing to help, because people who have been through this process are, I think, and that's supposed to be what we do next, right? We move on to an R1 and then we mentor new people. So, so people are out there that will help. The concept of shameless self-promotion, it really is. Like, the K is you promoting you, how great you are, and how great you could be if you get this extra support. So sometimes that can be a little uncomfortable for me. I know I feel like it's uncomfortable for me, but you have to kind of write your fairy tale, and you're kind of the hero of that fairy tale, right? And then finally, there's lots of resources out there. The NIH Reporter, your colleagues, other NIH-funded people. So it can be super overwhelming to kind of look at this process, but you're not kind of doing this alone. There's a lot of information, a lot of people out there who are willing to help. And so with that, we did want to give a couple of minutes to field any questions or comments, complaints. Yeah.
So I love that you kind of touched on the idea of, like, you want to make yourself sound great, but not too great, because that's actually, so I'm starting a research fellowship. I'm ending my residency, starting a fellowship, 2 years, starting in July, and that's one of the things I've struggled with, and part of it is because I've gotten really mixed messaging on the K process. I guess the very most specific example is while I was looking at post-residency research fellowship type opportunities, one of the places I went, which has a K-23 program, I talked to them and they were like, well, talk to us in a few years, because we don't really like anyone to go through a K-23 program who doesn't already have an advanced degree. You need to get your advanced degree first. Well, isn't that kind of part of the purpose?
Yeah.
And so that whole idea, I don't know, for trying to market yourself and write a career development plan, if you could comment on that, how does that work, after you have that advanced degree? Getting that advanced degree now, with a different institution. But I don't know, I guess that's the part that I struggle with this going, if I'm picturing out my path 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, is what am I writing in my career development plan, which is really, at least as I understand it, is kind of the biggest part of the K process and the focus of the brand.
Do you want to take that? So I'm writing. So I'm getting a PhD as part of mine. So I took the other route, which was like, look at me, I don't have it, but you have a master's.
I started with a master's in public health, so it's not hard though. There's so much you don't know, right? So you just have to tell them that. Like, for me, I said I need to know geographic information systems because refugees live all over the place, and I need to be able to overlay data. Actually, I haven't learned that yet, because as I got deeper in, I realized that wasn't that useful because the sampling methods, it didn't really work. But you need to find out, some people will come up with some type of high-level quantitative class that they never took, and that's going to help with your data analysis somehow. Or you've never done qualitative methods, and you need that. You need that so that you can hypothesis generate and know where to start, because you don't even know what question to ask in this brand new topic. So it just has to be you can say, I've never done a randomized control trial. I need to learn all about trials. I need to know multi-site. So it just needs to be high level. Go to your school, public health, or your PhD school, look through their booklet and see what you think would work for you to tell the story of how you're going to do better at that research that you want to do. But it's okay. People with PhDs get K-23s. I didn't have a PhD but I know a few in my research group who got K-23s, but they had to say, yeah, but my PhD was in this, and I know nothing about that.
Actually,
Your time when you had a few classes on, were those just one-off classes, essentially, that you went through the catalog?
Yes, and I didn't take them, but don't tell anyone.
Same here. Didn't take mine.
I don't want to take any
But I
more
think a lot of people who have PhDs end up doing the KO8 like DJ did too. So it's not set in stone. It really is like kind of just crafting it to be very specific to that skill set. And I think plenty of people with advanced
The
degrees.
easier answer is if you don't have a degree writing the K, then it's easy, right? You just say, oh, I'm going to get my master's of blah, 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 and then you're done.
Yeah.
If you already have, like, for example, I went in applying for a K with a master's clinical investigation, which is pure clinical, but since I'm doing more basic stuff, science stuff, it was easy just for me to say, oh, I'm going to do these sort of procedural things, blah, 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 and it's easy to make it work. And to be honest, compared to other components, the career development part's a little more straightforward in terms of like what skill set you want to develop and stuff like that.
Let us take we only have a few more questions, so yes, a few more minutes, a couple questions.
It seems like there's a tension between like doing all the hard work and taking a long process of getting everything, getting your idea, getting your mentorship team, but most people end up having to resubmit grants. So I want to tension between just like going for it like earlier, later knowing you have to resubmit versus like waiting as long as possible so you feel like everything's perfect. And I guess it's probably not, but I'm curious your thoughts.
It's like Goldilocks.
A mentor who has brought a number of people through the K-23 process will tell you when you're ready. They will know. They will see your publications, they will see your track record, and they'll know.
Yeah, sort of along the lines, like I think the magic question, the most common question I think related to that in terms of if you're ready or not, revolves around publications. If you look at the data, it totally widely varies, right? So, somewhere between 8 and 11 I think is what the norm is, I think for a lot of keywords, but definitely not the standard. I know someone who got a K just on one publication. It wasn't a Nature Science paper either, so it varies. It will kind of depend on what journals and where you're on the authorship and yada yada and things like that. So, but that is like a big I think factor to consider in a lot of things. A very common question people often have.
I think you want the feedback on the case. So I always look at these, I tell my mentees to look at publications, grants, and we talked about now the IRB submission too, as a negotiation. So you want to get feedback that you can address. So if their feedback to you is, you didn't publish any papers, you don't know your mentor team, like if your feedback is too simple, that's not going to be a helpful process, right? So you want to kind of attack as much as you can, but you're right, you don't want to wait until you're 55 and you're like, I mean, you can write a K when you're 55 if you want.
Personally, I think you're ready, Austin, so.
Okay, one more pressing question.
Yeah.
Everyone, I just took the SAEM grants workshop. It was amazing. I highly recommend everyone to join because they will break down a lot of the NIH partners. They were there to review a lot of our grants and really told us what's good, what's bad, and what we need to improve. So with that in mind, the mentorship. Question for you guys is, my trouble is building that mentorship team. How did you guys find our mentors, and did you guys have to relocate, and advices on how to build this team?
My entire team left during my first year of my KL2, and I think I have one mentor left at my institution. So it's all of our, you just have to make a concrete plan, but it's like, we do virtual mentorship, we meet at twice a year at national meetings, and we have like a really solid plan, but they do not have to be, they should be as local as you can, and it's better if you have a couple, but no, and I think cold calling actually works in a lot of these cases. You really can, if you can kind of support your claim that they should mentor you, and one mentor also will pull in other mentors for you, I think.
Yeah, and you can just shop around until you find the right fit. We're not going to leave, but we are going to step out because I can see people gathering.
Angry.
So if you have any more questions, we're happy to keep talking to you guys right outside the room. Thanks for coming.
Thank
Good
you,
luck,
guys.
everybody.